First of all, I'd like to just introduce the gallery to you, kind of tell you a bit about what we do and who we are. We were founded by Shenyang Coder, the one who can join us today, and we're the only gallery in London who exclusively specializes in Chinese contemporary art. Our ideal is to embrace all aspects of Chinese contemporary art and therefore to represent a large spectrum of artists whose media ranges from paintings and installations to photography and sculpture. The art that we showcase also varies hugely in terms of concepts, ideas, and also styles. And every artist represented by us is chosen for their artistic individuality, the creative symbolism in their work, and the emotional energy that their art creates. Today, we're delighted to give you a talk about the evolution of Chinese contemporary art, and we aim to shed light on the main artists and episodes that have marked the course of Chinese contemporary art and its creation of some of its new and fresh talents. As an exciting and fast-growing market, Chinese contemporary art is drawing collectors, curators, and aficionados alike from all over the world. The primary reason for this being the exceptional variety, creativity, and the strong potential that this field has been revealing for the past 30-so years. I'd like to introduce you to our gallery manager. This is Dagmar Carnevale Lavezzoli. Dagmar is a Chinese contemporary art specialist who's worked with many artists and spent years in China working with them and helping them to develop their careers and progress. She'll now give you a 30-minute talk or speech that will illustrate in a concise way the richness of this field. So if you have any questions afterwards, please feel free to approach either one of us, and we will open the floor for a few questions, though unfortunately we're a bit pressed for time, so we may have to cut you off after a couple. But yeah, let's welcome Dagmar. Thank you.
Hi, good morning everyone, and welcome to this breakfast at Morton's. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Dagmar, and I'd like to give a presentation about the evolution of Chinese contemporary art and its creation of today's fresh talents. So the first part of this talk will be focused on a background of Chinese contemporary art. I've selected some of the most relevant artists, art groups and exhibitions that shaped the course of Chinese contemporary art, but of course many more artists and events have not been included due to time constraints and to the depth of this field. So this is just to give a general idea about the flow and the development of Chinese contemporary art. In the second part of this talk, I will introduce the creations of two new artists represented by our gallery and so that we're very familiar with, and then I will also illustrate some more artworks by other young and fresh talents. So for those of you who are already specialists in Chinese contemporary art, I believe that the first part of this talk will be quite familiar to you, but hopefully you can still enjoy it and maybe get something new out of it, and especially out of the second part. Whilst for those of you who are new to the field, I hope that you can enjoy this talk in its entirety. Okay, so Chinese contemporary art can be divided into three main periods. The first one that goes from the end of the 1970s until 1989, the second one from 1989 until 2000, and the third one from 2000 until today. So the very beginning of Chinese contemporary art dates back to the end of the 1970s, after the death of Chairman Mao and the opening up of the country to the world with the reforms of Deng Xiaoping. So that period, the decade of the 1980s, was characterized by a very strong influence of Western art in China. And Chinese artists were mostly driven by a new sense of freedom, of spirituality, and the search for modernity. But at the same time, they also started to realize that in order to move on, they needed to incorporate this Western influence within the Chinese thought. And so they started to find inspiration within their own culture and their own tradition. And as a result, they created works that were both modern, innovative, with a Western influence, but also had a Chinese flavor. So that was really a period of pure experimentation in China. And amongst the most active groups at the time, certainly worth mentioning is the Stars group, that included artists such as Ai Weiwei, Wang Keping, and Chu Lelei, amongst others. And the Stars group are considered to be the very first avant-garde group in modern China, as they created works that were both innovative, very modern, explored new ideas and new concepts, and they were also socially charged. And this is a very representative work of the time. It's by artist Wang Keping. It's called Silence, and very well conveyed the general feeling that was shared amongst artists and people after the end of the Cultural Revolution. Another group was the Scar art, with artists such as He Duoling, and He Duoling's paintings are usually characterized by quite a grey palette, melancholic atmospheres, and the focus is on feeling of and emotions of young people portrayed in quite a realistic way. Another group was the rustic style painting with artists such as Luo Zhongli. And this is his most iconic work. It's called Father, and as we can see, portrays this huge portrait of a very ordinary man, of a peasant. And prior to this, these huge portraits were dedicated to outstanding political figures, in particular way to Chairman Mao. So we can understand that this work was very avant-garde for the time. And in the 1980s, there was also the 85 New Wave. There was an art movement that included a lot of different groups spread all over China. And all these art groups subsequently gathered into the major exhibition called China Avant-Garde that happened on the 5th of February 1989. And this is the exhibition considered to be the one that officially marked the birth of Chinese contemporary art, as for the very first time 186 artists were exhibiting works of quite a controversial nature within an official space, so within the Beijing National Art Gallery. And a crucial role was certainly played by female artist Xiao Lu, who as part of her performance she shot her own installation. So this was obviously a very controversial and much discussed gesture, and it led to the shutting down of the exhibition. But the year 1989 is also relevant because a few months later there was a Tiananmen incident. And so this traumatic event deeply shaped the course of modern China and also had some very strong reflections within art history. And so with the Tiananmen incident we really enter the one defined as the second period of Chinese contemporary art, so the post-89. And so in this period what happened is that certain artists, many artists, decided to leave the country as they felt really sad and upset about the situation what just happened. And so they preferred to move abroad. And this is the case of, for example, worldwide acclaimed artist Xu Bing, who is mostly renowned for deconstructing and constructing Chinese characters and English letters, creating a new, mysterious and quite enigmatic language. Another artist that left the country is Shen Qi. Shen Qi first moved to Italy, then went to France, and now is currently based here in London. And Shen Qi is mostly renowned for his extreme gesture of chopping off his little finger as a way to express his indignation toward the Tiananmen incident. And so he self-mutilated head and subsequently became one of the icons of Chinese contemporary art, because he not only bears his own personal drama, but he mostly bears the drama of a whole nation. Another artist that left the country, but in this case he actually left before Tiananmen in 86-87, is Cai Botiang. And Cai Botiang also went to the United States and also Japan, and is mostly renowned for playing with gunpowder, so for creating these very stunning and majestic explosions that evoke the ephemeral nature of beauty and life. But some other artists instead, of course many artists, decided to keep living in China. And although the very heavy and very harsh atmosphere of the time, they kept maintaining their own independent stances. So they kept speaking their own mind. And this is, for example, the case of the Ga brothers, a pair of artists, a pair of siblings, who since the middle of the 1980s have been really speaking their own mind in quite a courageous way. And this work is called The Execution of Christ, and is a very striking sculpture that has got a lot of symbolic layers behind it. And the 1990s also saw the two major artistic trends that really characterize the scene in China. And these are the political pop and cynical realism. So with political pop we have artists such as Wang Guangyi, whose work combines this Western iconography, so for example Coca-Cola and Omega, together with symbols belonging to the Maoist propaganda. And so his work is quite a statement about the situation in China at that time, when there was this very strong fusion between communism and consumerism. And the second movement is cynical realism, and this is a term that was created by Chinese art critic and curator Li Xianting, very important in China. And with cynical realism we have artists such as Yue Mingjun and his iconic frozen smiles that he's been creating both in canvases and in sculptures. And also artists such as Fan Lijun, mostly renowned for his floating, bold, colourful heads that really convey a sense of loss and disorientation that was very much felt amongst people at that time. But the 1990s also saw a great development of performance art, which happened quite in an underground way. In fact, after the Tiananmen incident, the Chinese authorities were not supporting the art, and even less they were supporting performance art. And so many artists, in order to give expression to their creativity, were obliged to gather in quite hidden situations, most of the time in suburbs of Beijing, for example. And this is Zhang Huan, and he's one of the greatest artists in performance art. And his work really explores the human body, the limits of the human body, and the human endurance in some very extreme situations. This is another work orchestrated by Zhang Huan. As we see, there are several bodies, several artists are joining this performance, and the human body is still the main element. But the 1990s also saw a significant growth in conceptual art, which although is less renowned here in the West in comparison to cynical realism and political pop, is still very relevant in terms of art history's achievement. And with conceptual art we mean work by, for example, Xiu Zhijie, a great photographer, a performance artist, calligrapher, and even curator, as well as work by Zhang Peili, considered to be the father of the video art in China. So the 1990s was a very interesting period in China because there was an internationalization of Chinese contemporary art. And most of these important exhibitions did not happen in the mainland but happened abroad. And so it was quite a peculiar situation because the support was coming from foreign countries rather than coming from China itself. So for example, there was a lot of interest in terms of curatorial interest or collector's interest. That is the period in which Uli Sieg and Yulen started to purchase some major Chinese contemporary artworks. And also in the 1993, it was the very first time the Chinese artists were represented at the Venice Biennale, that year curated by Achille Bonito Oliva with the consultation of Francesca Del Lago. And then we arrive in 2000 and we enter the one defined as the third period of Chinese contemporary art, and the situation completely changes again. So since 2000 it becomes much harder to define any specific movements or trends as we could easily do in the 1990s with, for example, cynical realism and political pop. So since 2000 a lot of artists have been creating many different works, exploring new mediums and experimenting with new technologies. And so the scenario of Chinese contemporary art became extremely varied and really pluralistic. And also since 2000, the Chinese authorities started to have a different approach in regard to the art. They actually started to realize that it's actually good to support the art, also because art can be a valuable commodity in today's market economy. So although a real and a true freedom in the art in China is still far from being the reality, because as we know there is still some very severe restrictions, especially in terms of political restrictions. But still, if artists today decide to acknowledge the boundaries between what can and what can't be exhibited in the mainland, then they can certainly enjoy much greater pleasure in exhibiting their works in comparison to what they could do in the 1990s. And so since 2000, there is this strong growth of Chinese contemporary artworks, both in primary and secondary markets. So in primary market, a lot of galleries of art fairs like Art 14 or Biennales are constantly representing Chinese contemporary artists, both in China and abroad. And in China we have some major art centers like 798 Art District or Songzhuang, Caochengdi, and also a lot of museums are constantly flourishing. And also in the secondary market we've been witnessing some major auction records within the past decade. So for example in 2007 the Yue Mingjun's work sold for nearly $6 million. Or in 2008, Zheng Fangzhe's work they sold for $9.7 million. Or in 2011, the Zhang Xiaogan's work sold for $10 million. And more recently, last October, Zheng Fangzhe's work, The Last Supper, they sold for $23.3 million. And this has been the highest auction record so far for a living Chinese contemporary artist. So we really see that the Chinese contemporary art scene is continuously growing, is really affirming a strong and relevant position within the global art market, and is expanding all over the world. And so as the only gallery in London that we are exclusively specialized in Chinese contemporary art, it is our pleasure and our mission that of continuously promoting both established and new artists to the audience. And so today I'd like to introduce you to the creations of two new artists represented by our gallery. And the first artist is called Han Ling. Okay, so Han Ling was born in 1974 in Jiangsu province and is currently based in Beijing, where he graduated from the Central Academy of Fine Art. And the fact that he was raised in a very small and impoverished village in rural China played a crucial role in shaping his own Weltanschauung, so his vision of the world and the way he relates himself to the globalization of China. And Han Bing's work is mostly centered around the critical theme of modernization in China today, and his work really encapsulates the dramatic transformations that China is currently undergoing. And what makes Han Bing's work interesting and quite outstanding is the fact that he deals with very relevant social matters, but he does it by employing quite a peculiar perspective, which is that of beauty and human desire. And also another reason it makes his work interesting is the fact that he's imbued with multiple layers of references. And I will tell you a bit more about this perspective of beauty, human desire, and about his references throughout the course of this introduction. So Han Bing is a multidisciplinary artist. He works with photography, with paintings, with installations, and also with videos and sculpture. And today I'd like to introduce you to his photographic series called Urban Amber. So as we can see, in Urban Amber there are trees, skyscrapers and buildings reflected in water. So what we see is the reflection of the environment within lakes and rivers in Beijing. And while at first these images look quite beautiful, our initial perception is subsequently challenged once we realize that actually all these images are made up of industrial waste and rubbish. So something that initially looks quite charming turns out to be pretty awful because it's pollution. And it's interesting to note the technique adopted by Han Bing. So the fact that after he has taken pictures, he flips them over. And so the land and the sky are reversed, and this obviously conveys a further sense of ambiguity within his photographic series. And so through these images, Han Bing is inviting us to contemplate our initial perception of beauty and to realize the true cost of our materialistic desires. So this photographic series is really addressing some environmental and ecological issues. But he does it by employing this quite peculiar perspective of beauty and human desire. So as we all know, human desire can be very strong, can be very passionate, but at the same time it can also be quite frightening and poisonous when we're out of control of it. And so this photographic series seems to be really encapsulating the polarity of human desire. As here these photographs merge this marvelous reverie of urbanization with the destruction of the environment. And so although these images are beautifully and gracefully rendered, they actually make quite a statement, as they bring in the attention to the consequences of uncontrolled human desire for consumption. And so in this sense, that here these photographs, the human desire is portrayed both in a charming but also in a very destructive and quite nasty way. And also another reason that makes his work interesting is, as mentioned, the fact that he's imbued with multiple layers of references, and one reference is the Western Impressionism. So if we look at this work, we see this impressionist-like texture, and this photograph is ethereal, is atmospheric, as if it is exuding the beauty of a mirage. But then if we look at the next one, we see that it's very heavy and dense, as if it is bearing the detritus of time. And this one instead is recalling the art of French painter Monet, and in particular way is recalling the Cathedral of Rouen, when Monet was painting the same subject over and over again during the same day, but in different moments of the day, trying to catch the variety of lights, of colors and shades. And here Han Bing, in just one single picture, is also able to catch the variety of lights, colors and shades. But differently from Monet, here Han Bing is not only portraying the beauty of nature, but is mostly portraying the contaminated beauty of nature. So this work automatically reflects a different historical period. And also this work here is reminiscent of Western artists, and in particular way he's recalling Van Gogh and Munch. If we look at the upper part of the composition, we notice that this curve seems to be recalling the brushstrokes of Van Gogh and Munch. Although the one of Van Gogh and Munch were much stronger and more vigorous, here, due to the fact that this is real water, these curves are much smoother and they convey a sense of fluidity. But Han Bing's work is also deeply rooted within the ancient Chinese philosophy of Taoism. And according to Taoism, man and nature are in a perfect union, and man is not trying to prevail nature, is not trying to dominate it, but is really respecting nature. And so in Han Bing's work we can really see that they reflect the artist's own Taoist yearning, so his desire to be back fused with nature. And these photographs also recall the traditional Chinese landscape painting called the shan shui, that literally means shan is mountain and shui is water. And the shan shui were these very stunning hand scrolls, most of the time horizontal, but they could also be vertical, in which the artist was depicting the beauty of the landscape. And in this landscape there were a lot of different natural elements, and one of those elements was the presence of human beings. And human beings were depicted in very tiny, tiny dimensions as a way to highlight the fact that human beings is not more important than rocks or trees or pagodas. It's really just a part of the environment, and for this reason it should have the same size. And also in some of Han Bing's work, like for example this one, we can notice that there are some very tiny, tiny figures, tiny human beings there. Again, as a way to highlight the fact that man is just a part of the landscape, it should not be any more important of it. And also this traditional Chinese landscape painting were not depicting nature from an objective perspective, but they were rather portraying nature from a subjective perspective, in the sense that the representation of the environment was really the artist's inner projection of his own inner world within the beauty of the landscape. And for this reason they were called the images of the mind, and they were permeated by a sense of spirituality. And also in Han Bing's work, we really see the artist's own spirituality and his own desire to be really respecting the environment as it was happening in the ancient times. So just to conclude with Han Bing, this is a very socially charged series of photographs, and they're both they're really bridging the East with the West, both from the perspective of content and form. So from the perspective of content, because as we've seen, these ecological and environmental issues which do not only concern China, but they obviously concern our own entire planet. And also in terms of form, because he's bridging, he's merging the Eastern tradition with the Western tradition, and he's reinterpreting them according to his own sensibility. And so through this photographic series, Han Bing is, on one hand, is highlighting this lack of respect for the environment, but on the other hand is also bringing forth a very beautiful and positive message, a message full of energy, in the sense that he's suggesting a return to an ancient and original fusion between man and nature. So it's almost opening up to some new horizons. And at the same time, I also think that this work is quite relevant because it seems to be grasping a feeling that we're all sharing in our modern times, so a feeling of anxiety that we have for the future of our own planet and for the current situation of the environment. Okay, so this one was Han Bing. And now I'd like to introduce you the second artist of today, and he's called Chang Lei. And Chang Lei was born in 1976 in Shandong province, and is currently based in Beijing, where he graduated from the Jianshe University, so the University of Art and Design. Chang Lei is also a multidisciplinary artist. He works with painting, with photography, and with performance. But in recent years, he's been mostly focusing on painting. And so today I'd like to introduce you to his latest series of oils, some of which have never been displayed before. And this series is called The Sanguinary Shadows of Chinese Civilization. So as we can immediately notice from the title, there is quite a sinister feeling that is conveyed. And in this series, Chang Lei portrays traditional Chinese cultural figures, objects and places related to Chinese culture. And in particular way, he portrays Chinese opera figures, historical and fictional characters, as well as terracotta warriors and ancient Chinese ceramics. As we see, this figure emerged from a splatter of darkness and seems to be floating in quite an ethereal and mysterious way within the canvas. And the brushstrokes of the background are very dark and thick, and on one hand they seem to recall the traditional Chinese ink painting, but on the other hand they're also very modern and abstract. And it's interesting to note the contrast between the background and the figures emerging from the background. So whilst the background is either very dark, like here, or sometimes is more washed and misty, like here, and conveys a dramatic sense of uncertainty, the figures emerging from this background are, on the other hand, very meticulously and carefully painted. We can notice every single details, and they're also very realistically portrayed. And also they're much lighter and brighter. And then we see that these images are subsequently bespattered with some subtle red, alluding to the more sinister intentions of the artist. So, through this contrast between the dark tones of the background and these bright colors of the figures, these paintings question the foundations on which Chinese civilization is established. So, Zheng Lei would like us to remember the sacrifices made by ordinary people throughout the course of the centuries in order to accomplish what tyrannical leaders wanted. And an example that Zheng Lei often provides, and that is quite representative of his thought, is that of the Great Wall. So the Great Wall, that, as we all know, is this majestic and exceptionally beautiful construction in China, but at the same time is also work completed with blood and tears of ordinary people. So basically, Zheng Lei believes that China's cultural development, as also other countries' cultural development, was born out of oppression, and that it's quite common that officials employ some cultural symbols and icons as a way to make their own political propaganda. And so through these works, the artist is trying to portray both positive and negative sides that have marked the course of Chinese civilization. And Zheng Lei is very interested in exploring the history of China, in examining its cultural richness through quite a thorough and critical perspective. So he acknowledges the beauty of this artistic and cultural patrimony, but at the same time is interested in raising awareness about the other side of the coin. And in doing so, the artist is trying to achieve the truth. So he's trying to achieve the beauty of the truth, the beauty of understanding how things really are. And in this sense, we can understand why he often portrays these beautiful and charming ladies. The reason is that these female figures are not only some stunning icons of the Beijing opera, but they also seem to allegorize the romantic ideal of beauty is truth and truth is beauty. And so, just to finish with Zheng Lei, this is quite an intense series of paintings, and they're both intimately connected to Chinese cultural and political issues, but at the same time they also embody humanistic and romantic feelings. Okay, so this one was Zheng Lei. And now we have a few more minutes, and I'd like to quickly show you some other artworks by other young and fresh talents. We haven't really had the chance of collaborating with these artists yet, but I still think that they're very representative for the Chinese contemporary art scene of today. So this is a work by the Animas group. This is a Beijing-based group of 3 young artists who explore the concept of fullness and emptiness, of presence and absence, through these very dramatic and beautiful sculptures. This is a work by Liu Guangguang, Nice Touch of Humor, and Liu Guangguang belongs to the post-80s generation of artists who are often engaged with the theme of identity. So although this work is apparently fun and hilarious, it's actually evoking quite a sense of disorientation and an atmosphere of uncertainty. And then a work by Zhou Hehe. Zhou Hehe also belongs to the post-80s generation of artists, and his work is very dark, it's cryptic and gothic. And Zhou Hehe is the daughter of worldwide acclaimed artist Zhou Chunya, whose art is a bit more fun than the one of his daughter. So this is Zhou Chunya's art, and he's not a new artist, he's a very well-established artist, and he's mostly renowned for his green dogs with pink tongues. So it seems that his daughter really wanted to take some distance from his father art, and together they kind of complement each other. And then a work by Lu Feifei. Lu Feifei creates works that are socially charged, and she often explores issues related to the discrimination against females in China. So, for example, in this photograph we have these 2 little girls, and on their back these Chinese characters. They read Niu Er Ye Shu Chuan Ho Ren, that translated means females are also heiresses. And then a work by Lu Xinjian. Lu Xinjian is a Shanghai-based artist, and we're actually already collaborating with him. We will have a show of Lu Xinjian in the beginning of June. And Lu Xinjian creates very interesting and intriguing cityscapes, in which, as he says, he portrays the DNA of cities. So the DNA could either be the structure, or the bones, or the heart, or even the soul of city. And as we can see, these paintings that really require a lot of meticulous and careful work. And then the last work I'd like to show you is by Li Hui. Li Hui creates these very stunning installations of light that are a real experience for the visitor. So people can actually walk through them, and so this work generates an immediate reaction in the person that is walking. And through these installations, Li Hui is exploring questions of existence and impermanence of technology and humanity by creating these very magic atmospheres. Okay, so now I'd like to conclude this entire talk about Chinese contemporary art by highlighting the fact that this is a very wide realm, and what we've seen today is only a very tiny fraction in comparison to the depth of this field. And although this field is not so long in terms of history, as it has just slightly more than 30 years, in terms of concepts of creativity and of achievement, it's really a huge field. And in these 30 years of time, Chinese artists have been dealing with major issues, have been facing traumatic events, and obviously they've experienced this according to their own generation, so either directly or indirectly. But in any case, all these events have really become part of the collective memory of the country, so they've become like a collective burden that each person, each artist has to deal with. But at the same time, Chinese contemporary artists are not only Chinese artists, they're also contemporary artists. In fact, their works have really become part of an international, of a global art scene. And so their art often transcends nationality and is addressed to a very wide audience. And they create works that really touch upon many different issues, explore a lot of different ideas, themes and styles. And they also bring forth some very beautiful and positive messages. And so in this art we can really feel a mixture between a sense of loss and of pain related to the past, and a sense of optimism and possibility that continuously engages with the future. And so I think that Chinese contemporary art has now reached quite a mature stage in which we can really see the breadth and the depth of this field. And so in this regard, I'd like to read you a very short quote by François Cheng. François Cheng is a Chinese-born French academic, a writer, poet, and a great expert in both Chinese art and Western art. And this quote, from a philosophical perspective, seems to be really grasping a common point that can be found in many Chinese contemporary artworks today. In order for an artistic creation to be complete, it should give expression to the violent and suffering part of life, as well as continuously reveal the component of potential beauty disclosed by the living universe. Every artist, in the end, should accomplish the mission once appointed by Dante: to explore hell and paradise at the same time. And this was François Cheng in 5 Méditations sur la beauté, 5 Meditations on Beauty. And I'm done, so thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we want to open the floor for a couple of questions. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask further on in Dagmar's talk? Anybody at all? Are they brave? No? We done? Okay. Well, if anybody thinks of anything later, please come up to us, let us know. And we'll also be at R14 at stand F5, so if you want to visit us then, we'd love to see you. So thank you very much. Thank you for coming.